In a bustling city where skyscrapers kissed the sky, a tiny ant named Annie lived. Amid the towering buildings and sprawling parks, Annie made her home, a world within a world. She was not just any ant, she was a city ant, a tiny dot of life in the heart of a concrete jungle. Her days were filled with adventure. She'd navigate through the labyrinth of sidewalks, each crack a canyon, each pebble a mountain. She'd search high and low for food, from the crumbs of a businessman's sandwich to the sweet remnants of a child's ice cream cone. She was a part of a large and bustling ant colony, a community of hardworking ants just like her. They'd communicate in their own intricate ways, passing messages and sharing news about the best food spots or looming dangers. In the city that never sleeps, Annie, our little ant, was about to embark on a great adventure. One day, as Annie was scurrying about, she noticed something unusual. The city was buzzing with an unfamiliar tension. The hustle and bustle that usually filled the air had been replaced by hushed whispers and worried glances. Something was off, and Annie the ant couldn't ignore it. It didn't take long for her to find out what was wrong. The city was facing a problem, a big one. There had been no rain for months, and the city's food supply was dwindling. Gardens once lush with leaves and fruits were now barren and dry. The once vibrant city was turning into a ghost town. The city dwellers, once full of life and laughter, were now filled with worry and fear. The baker ants had no dough to knead, the gardener ants saw their plants wither away, and the children ants no longer had the energy to play. The joyous hum of the city had turned into a desperate murmur. Everywhere she looked, Annie saw the effects of the drought. The once sparkling river that flowed through the city was now just a trickle. The grand trees that provided shade were now skeletal, their leaves brown and crisp. The city, once a haven for its inhabitants, was now a scene of despair. The problem seemed insurmountable. The city's elders, wise and experienced, were at a loss. They had faced many challenges before, but this was unlike anything they had seen. The city needed rain, but the skies remained stubbornly clear. The city's reserves were running low, and it seemed like there was no solution in sight. Annie saw the worry in everyone's eyes. She saw the helpless shrugs of the elders, the anxious pacing of the parents, and the confused faces of the young ones. The city was in trouble, and it seemed like there was nothing anyone could do. But Annie was not one to stand by and watch her city suffer. She was an ant of action, and she knew she had to do something. The city was in peril, and help seemed far away. But Annie was there, and she was ready to face the challenge head-on. Annie, though small, was not one to stand by while her city suffered. This tiny ant, with a heart as grand as the city she lived in, was determined to save her home, her family, and her friends. Annie was a natural problem solver, and she knew that she had to devise a plan. She put on her thinking cap, a leaf she had fashioned into a hat, and began to strategize. The city's problem was twofold: a scarcity of food and a looming flood. She knew she couldn't solve both issues alone, but she was hopeful that with the help of her fellow ants, they could overcome their challenges together. For the food shortage, Annie had a brilliant idea. She remembered a lush forest just beyond the city limits, where juicy fruits and sweet nectar were abundant. It was a long journey for a little ant, but Annie was ready to take on the challenge. She began to rally the ants, encouraging them to form a line, a lifeline, stretching from the city to the forest. This way, they could transport food back to the city, ensuring everyone would have enough to eat. But Annie knew that food wouldn't matter if their city was washed away by the flood. She needed a solution, and fast. She looked around and noticed the city's intricate network of tunnels. It struck her then they could divert the floodwaters through the tunnels, away from their homes. It was risky, but it was the best shot they had. With her plan in place, Annie presented it to the queen. She spoke with conviction and courage, not letting her size diminish her voice. The queen was moved by Annie's determination and gave her blessing for the plan. With the queen's approval, Annie began to coordinate her fellow ants. They worked tirelessly, digging new tunnels and reinforcing old ones, preparing for the flood. Simultaneously, the line of ants marched towards the forest, ready to gather food for their city. Annie was ready. She was small, but her bravery was immense. She was a tiny ant with a gigantic plan, ready to save her city no matter what. With a heart full of hope and determination, Annie set off on her mission. She had a plan, and it was time to put it into action. Our tiny heroine, armed with bravery and a sense of purpose, began her journey, undeterred by the challenges that lay ahead. As she ventured into the vast forest, the towering trees seemed to reach up to the sky, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze. But Annie wasn't afraid of the shadows. She knew that her mission was bigger than her fear. She pressed on, meeting every challenge head-on. The forest was home to many creatures, some of which were predators to a tiny ant like Annie. She had to tread carefully, avoiding the watchful eyes of birds and the keen noses of ground-dwelling creatures. But with her nimble legs and quick thinking, Annie managed to evade these dangers. She was a tiny dot in a big world, but she held within her the spirit of a true hero. Then came the floodwaters. The city had been hit by heavy rains, turning calm streams into raging rivers. But Annie was not deterred. She used her knowledge of the city's terrain to find the safest paths, navigating the treacherous waters with the precision of a seasoned explorer. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Annie reached her destination. With a deep breath, she set her plan into motion, working tirelessly to resolve the city's problem. It was a daunting task, but Annie was not one to back down. She worked with all her might, her tiny legs moving at a dizzying pace. And then, just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Annie completed her mission. She had done it. She had saved the city. The citizens woke up to a new day, their hearts filled with gratitude for the tiny ant who had saved them from disaster. Annie, the tiny city ant, had become the city's biggest hero. Her story is a testament to the power of courage and determination, proving that no matter how small you are, you can make a big difference.